Okay, I think we are live. Coughing drag is always the right way to start a live stream. I was gonna say I was hey GW, what's up? I was gonna say I was inspired to do this by David Wood returning to his regular live streams. Yeah, I know this is unusual, probably because I do it at such excuse me. I do it at such well, I do it intermittently. I mean, I'm not one of those YouTubers that has a prescribed schedule where they upload videos and do live streams every day. For example, Mike Winger, the Think Biblically guy, he does a regular live stream, I think I want to say every Thursday. Hi, Alejandro. Um, and most other legitimate YouTubers, they have they have a set schedule where they upload videos, uh, one video every couple of days, or in addition to a live stream on a regular day of the week. But I don't do that. I just live stream when the fancy strikes me. Um, uh, Although looking back at the fact that David Wood returned probably did did spark a that probably did spark something. I was moderating the X17 with a guy he actually used to be in prison with back when, and a little. Nabil alludes to this a little bit. Nabil Qureshi in his memoir "Seeking Allah, Finding Jesus," he refers to David Wood's prison time very elusively. I forget which chapter it's at, but basically he spent a couple of years right after high school, I think, shuttling between a prison and a mental health facility and a mental and a psych ward, I think, within a prison. I'm not sure of the exact details, but around high school age, he he describes this a lot in his testimony on the X17 Apologetics channel. He talks about how and later on he was actually diagnosed as a psychopath, but he didn't realize it at the time as he was growing up. He didn't form any real to people or things. He talks about his dog dying and his reaction, and then his friend dying later on, and him having basically the same empty reaction. And he eventually this progressed to the point where he basically had a psychotic break and he attacked his father, who survived thankfully, but he was imprisoned and sent to a series of prisons and mental health facilities. And in there he was witness to by an inmate who had turned himself in after committing 34 or 35 felonies. I forget how many he actually confessed to, but he turned himself in after a life of crime, and according to David, he's still in prison to this day. Hi, Richard. But he sort of got into this. This man was a Christian, and he got into this long-running debate with him. David was a hardcore atheist, and he started challenging him, and eventually David would, in order to try to best him, he decided that he would fast. He would outfast him, and as a result, he wound up hospitalized and on the brink of death. And that's when he actually started to consider the questions that he had been posed to him and some of the things that they were discussing in terms of God and the Bible and existence. And he started actually reading the Bible, and he got saved. And that was the start. Even though it took a while, that was the start of his apologetics ministry in a way. Although it really began when he met Nabil Qureshi. He was released from prison and he went to college. He wound up earning, I think, master's degree and a PhD, and he was going to become a full-time professor when he was called to preach to Muslims, and he started Acts 17 apologetics with Nabil, who was his college classmate. Nabil actually discusses this in the book I referenced. They were on the same debate team, and they became partners in a sense. Hightower time. No, he wasn't saved from being a psychopath. He still has. He's still a psychopath, but he doesn't act on those tendencies. The thing is, it was a psychological diagnosis, but the actions he took when he was before he was saved, he actually went out and had no regard for people that were not him. So he would attack people and lash out and just have a general disdain for humanity. And when he did this because he didn't really believe that there would be any any non-temporal consequences for his actions. So yeah, he might be imprisoned or or be punished, but the thing was, he grew up in a family which was very dysfunctional and who had drug abuse and criminality throughout. So those were the sort of things that he was sort of inured to. He didn't really care about them, but when he actually found out that there would be eternal consequences for the way he was living his life and for his beliefs, he actually started to re-examine this belief. And he mentioned this on one of his live streams, the idea that I think he referred to it as metaphysical solipsism. And I don't think he himself was subject to this, but he was very close to this, believing in this idea that he was the only person in existence and that everyone around him sort of was instituted for his benefit. So it didn't really matter what he did to them. So he was operating with that sort of mind frame, that he had acquired some sort of unique or ascended to some unique plane of above humanity in general, and how he related to people was really of no consequence. They were simply sort of, I wouldn't say figments of his imagination, but they were subsidiary to his own, whatever his own desires were at the moment. And reading the Gospels and the Bible really altered his position. And he came to the realization that he wasn't put here just to, or that people weren't put here in order to satisfy his whims, or that he was really put here to serve God and humanity. And so it's a really interesting story. I probably expressed most eloquently in his testimony video on Acts 17 apologetics. If you go to his channel, he has this testimony video, which I think is like an hour long or an hour and a half long. I'm not sure. He basically it's this unedited one-shot video with him going down into the subway and traveling through the subway as and then he emerges into the daylight in New York City. This was when he lived in New York City. This was years ago. Yeah, I've heard that too about the moon splitting. That this is a future prediction. The funny thing is, Muslims apparently are anti-preterism when it turns out that their predictions haven't come to what Muhammad's predictions haven't come to pass. So anything that Muhammad said would happen, which has never happened, is apparently part of some future eschatological event. So even if that event was time sensitive and was outlined, for example, the fall of the Roman Empire or Judgment Day, I think there's a hadith that describes the Muhammad predicting when the apocalypse would come to pass, and it was within a generation or two, his lifetime. Of course, that did not happen, since we're 13 and a half centuries later, and we're still here. Yeah, Muhammad plagiarized Arabic poetry. He plagiarized pseudoepigrapha and Roman tales, like the Seven Sleepers is basically a Byzantine folklore that Muslims incorporated into their own philosophy in order to claim that Muhammad and his companions and their disciples had these miraculous events occur to them, that early Muslims, in order to attest to the miraculous nature of the Quran, they would invent these stories about early Muslim believers, and some of the stories weren't even about Muslims. Is part of Byzantine folklore that they just incorporated, and it's a surah in the Quran. You can read it, but it's not. It's basically transposed into the Islamic or the Quranic manuscripts. This idea that there were these boys or young men that survived in a cave for and outlasted an evil ruler who hated Islam. It was an early Byzantine tale about a group around before the Christianization of the Roman Empire. Yeah, the Sabians. Yeah, the Sabians. It's interesting because there are the Sabians. There are the Sabians and the Sabians who were a group. What do you say? Yeah, an ancient South Arabian people of Saudi Arabia, and the Sabians. The Sabians are known primarily through the Quran, and it's interesting that they're it could be the Manichaeans, it could be the Nabatea. It's kind of confusing because some of the way the Quran is structured and the references are so it's so opaque that it's hard to trace back who is being referred to. And like I said, a lot of it is just folklore mixed in with certain. I mean, like you'll have certain historical events that are misconstrued and inserted in with Arabic folklore, and some of the references are to actual people groups that existed in the Arabian Peninsula at some time in the past or in the Middle East, and others are to groups that we have no real verification for, like the Collyridians are referred to as a group that worshipped Mary as part of the Trinity, and the only extant text we have referring to this group is from some Greek philosopher or historian, and and the Quran. So we're basically relying on the word or the words of a group of people who are historically unreliable when it comes to history and religion and all these other things that that are described in texts like the Quran. Yeah, Mani was a Persian philosopher, and it's kind of interesting because Manichaeism was, I think, the second largest religion on the planet at one time. It was at one point it was it was vying for allegiance with Christianity as one of the most religions. And in fact, Augustine was a disciple of Mani at one point before being saved at the age of 30, I believe. And after that, he was baptized, and he actually became a church elder. He was a disciple of the Bishop of Ambrose, the Bishop of Milan. But before that, he was and he he describes this in his book, in his autobiography, which is really the first real autobiography we have. Confessions, memoir / testimony / history. It's an interesting book, but he talks about being brought up on being influenced by Mani and his teachings, and it was a hugely popular religion at one point. A lot of the Gnostic cults, Gnosticism in general, was very extremely popular in the ancient world. Petra. Yeah, the Sabians. It let me just see if I can do a little quick research, because I talked about this before. Again, they're like the let me see. Yeah, they're known mostly through the Quran, but some people think that the people being referred to are the Nabateans. Like, where is it? Okay, here I found the Jewish scholar Maimonides translated the book The Nabatean Agriculture, which he considered an accurate record of the beliefs of the Sabians, who believed in idolatrous superstitions mentioned in the Nabatean Agriculture. The Sabians are also mentioned in the literature of the Baha'i faith, which and the Baha'i, that's basically a heretical offshoot of Islam. Hi, Christine. Good to see you. 21st century scholars. Yeah, 21st century scholars have identified the Sabians as the Mandeans. The Mandeans are the ones. They're the group in Iraq. They're the ones that. Yeah, again, it's a Gnostic religious sect, and they sort of revere John the Baptist, and they believe in constantly a form of baptism, just constantly washing yourself or cleansing yourself. And the irony is that the Sabians are referred to in the Quran. They're actually included in this group along with Jews and Christians. They're included in this group that is considered, I don't know if you would say protected, but they're included in this group, at least sirs. They're considered favorably, and that's the irony here, because they're not what you would they're not what you would consider a monotheistic sect. So, and this is just another indication that a lot of the professed claims of Muslims are demonstrably false. Like when they say that Islam is a monotheistic religion, that it rejects paganism, and you go back and you actually examine the Quran and you examine Islamic practices and Islamic texts and documents, you realize it is intimately connected with paganism, and it's not an Abrahamic religion, even though they have someone described as Abraham or Ibrahim in the Quran. He's described essentially as an idolatrous figure, someone who destroys non-Islamic idols but retains an idol that Muhammad sought to center worship around. So all the practices, like the Kaaba, the giant stone cube, which is an essential part of one of the 5 pillars. You have to make the Hajj and go to Mecca, and one of the things you have to do is circumambulate around this giant stone cube and stone it. And again, this is a pagan practice. Even the number of prayers, the salat, and all of these other things, they're incorporated from paganism, which makes sense when you think about the Quraysh and the type of religious practices they had before Muhammad arrived. And in the Quran itself, you see Muhammad entering Mecca. This is before he conquered it. When he traveled to Mecca, and he would refer to what's the Grand Mosque, or the center of worship, and he would refer to this as the center of worship while it was still controlled worship of the pagan Arabs who lived there. So he's essentially venerating an object that's pagan, and the Muslims, the justification for this from the Muslims would be that, they corrupted this practice that had existed for millennia before. This cube was actually created by Ibrahim, and he worshipped Allah. The only problem with that is that there's absolutely no evidence for this other than, again, Muslim sources. So you have Muslims saying, "Oh, this was created by Ibrahim." There's no evidence that Abraham went to this part of Saudi Arabia, much less that he created this stone cube. There is a lot of evidence that this was a center of worship for pagan Arabs, basically. Hi, Ernst. Glad to see I have some international viewers. I haven't checked the analytics, but I think there's always like maybe 5% or so of the people that watch these videos that come from overseas. Yeah, so yeah, the ones who are actually consider themselves that, I think it's a pretty small number, but the actual influence over culture is much bigger. I mean, things like Nowruz is a huge festival in Iran and parts of Iraq, the Kurdish parts of neighboring countries. So, I mean, even though the actual religious practice is very minuscule, I think the legacy and cultural influences is pretty substantial still to this day. Yeah, Freddie Mercury was a Parsi. They actually, it, there's actually a scene in the biopic that what's his name, Remy Malik did, Bohemian Rhapsody. There's actually a scene revolving around the fact that his parents, who were, I think they were forced to leave Uganda, and they were Parsis. So there's actually a scene that alludes in the movie. Yeah, yeah, it's weird. Iran actually has a couple of seats reserved for religious minorities, I believe. I don't know if they have one for the Baha'i. I mean, the Baha'i are pretty persecuted, but in Iran. Yeah, I actually read the Robert Spencer's book. I think I might actually have it on my shelf. I'm not sure. I have three. I think I have three of Robert Spencer's books, and I've read about half a dozen or so, including the last one about um, the Palestinian issue. But yeah, Did Muhammad Exist is actually a pretty good book. He he debated David Wood, and it's still on the Act 17 page if you search for it. He debated David Wood on the historicity of Muhammad. Debate that you find on this subject. Um, it's really good. I happen to agree with David Wood. I mean, the thing is, the historiography of Muhammad is so poor, and we're relying on sources that are so unreliable, i.e., Muslim chroniclers, usually centuries later of Muhammad's life, that people automatically assume that they're not automatically, but they might tend to assume that Muhammad did not exist because the historiography of him is so poor, especially the earliest sources. But I don't necessarily think that that's a reason to doubt his existence. I think he did exist, although Al-Fadi and Jay Smith and Robert Spencer, of course, are much more skeptical. I think he did, and David Wood presents a pretty good or a pretty compelling case that that he did. Yeah, that's true. There's a part of the Quran that actually says if I forget what surah it is, but it says if his aorta is severed, then basically he's a false prophet. And lo and behold, that's what happened in the case of Muhammad. He actually died the death that if you believe in the Quran would lead you to dismiss his prophethood, and that's the amusing thing about the Quran. If you actually take it as authentic and valid, then you would. It's a bit of a conundrum. If you actually receive it as authentic, then you would have to reject the truth claims of the Quran because there are so many. I mean, even aside from the internal contradictions, there's stuff that there's verses in the Quran that, if you believe them, would force you to reject Muhammad's prophethood. Yeah, he was poisoned with. He was given poisoned lamb by the widow of a Jewish man that he killed. Yeah.